Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where right now, Tinseltown is really hurting. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine in the industry last week, and they pointed out a saying that's going around town, and that's, you just gotta survive until 25, aka 2025. You just gotta survive the year. And that, of course, I think is referring in large part to coming out of the strikes. But also, I think Hollywood is, evolving, and they're afraid of what they're going to be and, if it will be as good as what they were before. And that is not only coming out of COVID, but what COVID really did to Hollywood. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well. Why do you think Hollywood is having such a difficult time right now? Some of you might argue it's partially political. And that could be a smaller factor. Interestingly, we're going to talk about Civil War's continued moderate success, but success sure enough. But I think that COVID trained everybody to watch streaming. And streaming also blew up during that time. Hollywood shifted focus to survive COVID, the pandemic, where everybody was, couldn't go to the theater. But everybody was like, this is pretty great. So Hollywood is having a very hard time getting you to the multiplex. I was also talking to someone else yesterday, another friend, and we were discussing why go to the theater when you've got an 8-hour movie available at home to binge at no extra cost. We've talked about that a whole lot. That's the whole reason they had the strikes also, is what's the pay model look like with that kind of content, where you're not paying a la carte? How do you divvy up the subscription fee considering it's so low? Et cetera, et cetera. But as for the consumer, we've talked a lot about the industry, but from a consumer perspective, you can get an 8-hour movie to watch at home at your leisure, at, again, no extra cost, as part of a monthly subscription that's cheaper than a single movie ticket in many cities. And even if you're in a place where movie tickets are a lower price point, two movie tickets or 3 movie tickets certainly will cover this streaming service subscription. And, if you're a part of a family, you can do that easily. So in this new world order, though, one silver lining is that there's room for a small, also the strikes have delayed a lot of the bigger ticket items. Like there was no Super Mario this April. All right, so anyway, in this new world order, there are pockets of opportunity that a small niche yet elite distributor like A24 can take advantage of. And that's exactly what they've done with Civil War. But it's more than just taking advantage of an opportunity. That doesn't give enough credit to A24 and Alex Garland. So let's talk about that. Now, I have found it both amusing and interesting that people on Twitter are arguing in the movie's defense that Civil War isn't actually about Civil War, despite that being the title of the film. But instead, the movie is actually about the current state of journalism. And if that is indeed the case, well, then you still have to give credit in there are 2 takeaways, I think, from that. It's very clever of Alex Garland to use high-concept packaging for the film. What kind of American are you? That made the movie. That line from Jesse Plemons. And also the red sunglasses in his delivery. But I think that totally has gone a long way to selling the movie. But also, since it was misleading high-concept packaging, it's not actually about a civil war, I think that is undercutting the film to a degree. When you take everything, I know some of you will disagree with that, but, don't worry, I'm not done with the conversation. All right, so take into account Everything Everywhere All at Once, also from A24, which also had high concept packaging, although in this case not misleading, with the multiverse and martial arts. And now you have Civil War, which again, while it didn't actually deliver what it promised in some regard, I'm sure some of you are happier with what the film delivered, but you can't deny that a number of people went in to see a movie about a modern Civil War and did not get that. But nevertheless, A24 is developing a pretty good formula, right? Intellectual commentary, but you put it in high concept packaging. And, I think that Civil War's success, despite its mediocre audience scores, proves that that is the way to go. Just going forward, someone should say to Alex Garland, can you put a couple actual Civil War scenes in this movie so that we can have it all? But the semi-success of Civil War also brings to mind, I wonder if you've thought of this as well, Benioff and Weiss's short-lived Confederate pitch to HBO. That was an alternate history where the South had won the OG Civil War. Now, obviously, based on the immediate backlash and just common sense, that was a very bad idea. However, based on the curiosity audiences have for this new Civil War movie, even with those weak audience scores, that shows that while it's become clear that there's money to be made with conservative content, there's also money to be made with liberal content and content that pits the two ideologies against each other. Now, sure, the news already knows this. I wish they had never gotten rid of the fairness doctrine. I believe it was Karl Rove and Dick Cheney who, if you watch Vice, it's just a quick line in there, but if you watch Adam McKay's Vice, that they got rid of that rule that said you couldn't have a side. I think the UK still has this, although people are getting fined for breaking it because, that's just the world we live in over in the, in the whole world, but that's what's happening in the UK. But by getting rid of the fairness doctrine that said you couldn't have an ideological perspective in the news, that set the stage for Fox News to be developed. And then Fox News became so successful that other news agencies have tried to either offer an alternative or to copy that to some degree, but it's all very, very interesting. So the news already knows that there's money to be made here. But that money can also be made in the narrative space is an interesting development. Before, the much lauded The Handmaid's Tale, season 6 apparently is coming in 2025, that was really the only content that occupied this space. And that was decidedly the very liberal camp. Civil War, which I also feel is actually a very liberal film, but it's presented as not having a side, which, maybe is helping it a little bit at the box office as well. But Civil War shows the expansion and evolution of that content business model. So I'll be curious to see in the next couple of months and years what kind of content comes out of Hollywood, after The Handmaid's Tale and now Civil War. So it's fascinating. Benioff and Weiss, they sure messed up their pitch. I'm watching, I just finished Manhunt. That's a fascinating show. Fascinating show on Apple TV. I feel bad that its audience score is so low. I feel like people reviewed it without finishing it. If you see the trial of the people who contributed to the assassination of Lincoln, and you see who the witnesses are, who was brave enough to step forward, it just shows, how little this country has changed, both in the bad ways and the scary ways, but also in the groups that at the end of the day really step up and don't get enough credit for it. Oh my gosh, I really highly recommend this show. All right, so Civil War, the new movie, fell 56% in its second weekend. Now, sure, it would have been nicer to see it with a drop in the 40s. Dune, too, had a drop in the 40s for its second weekend. But with, again, its weaker audience scores, one would expect a second weekend drop in the 60s. So this is actually really good, considering. So that Civil War not only dropped in the 50s, but was able to fend off two new releases. That's nice. That's nice for the film. It makes the film look good. I think that shows that there's certainly a curiosity factor in play for the film, not just because of the high concept packaging, but then you add to that it opened at #1 last weekend. Everybody becomes a little bit more interested in a #1 movie. And now the controversy that's erupted over the past week, whether or not the film is good, with people very, very entrenched on both sides, like a little Civil War as well right there, it might be driving some people to say, let me just go see this movie and decide what I think about it for myself. So that's all working in the film's favor. And with just challengers, look at those projections for challengers. I hope for Zendaya's sake it opens bigger than that. And the little advertised Boy Kills World hitting theaters next weekend, Civil War could still be in a fight, a genuine fight for #1 in its third weekend. It might not get it. Challengers might edge it out, but it could be a very close #2. The success and controversy over Civil War will, I think, likely help its awards chances. I mean, it's looking better and better, and so I think that's going to keep it around. Not only because of the success and the discussion about the film, but while A24 is new to box office success, they have a lot of experience running a successful awards campaign. Look at Everything Everywhere All at Once. Now, I continue to feel that the film's best bet for a win is Kirsten Dunst. What do you think is the best bet for a win for Civil War for next year's awards season? And she's already doing a great job getting press for the film, as well as for herself and her entire career, which you have to admit is pretty iconic at this point. Also, kudos to her for bringing up the gender pay gap in Hollywood. Now, this is a very nuanced conversation that doesn't lend itself well to social media. She is certainly not arguing that she should have been paid the exact same amount as the actor playing the titular superhero, right? Spider-Man obviously gets paid the most, but she is pointing out that the two salaries should have been closer, especially since she not only had box office hits going into the franchise while Maguire did not, But she's also talking about the pay for the sequel, Spider-Man 2. And her MJ was certainly a big part of what made the first film work. I don't think, I think it's just, the inherent misogyny that unfortunately still exists in the world. But I think that female characters are just never given enough credit for what they bring to the table, creatively and business-wise. I think for sure Kirsten Dunst helped sell tickets for that. And I think when you have hindsight and you look back, after something's come out, I think you can see that even more clearly. Also, on Twitter, there's always this behind-the-scenes thing of her, on the first movie, doing the stunt work herself for the balcony scene. And I'm really impressed with the professionalism of how she carries herself in that scene. These roles, particularly back then, were underwritten. They didn't have any nuance or complexity to them. But it's not Kirsten Dunst's fault that the role's not great. I mean, she did the best that she could with it. And she's clearly very much a professional. And by the way, make no mistake, this very conversation not only helps her awards campaign, but I think it's intentional. I think her awards campaign has already started. I didn't even like Civil War, as you know, but I'd be tempted to vote for Dunst for her overall body of work, plus to give her the recognition that I do feel she deserves. Especially after, as she's also been pointing out in interviews, good roles for women get scarce after a certain age. Searching for Deborah Winger was made over 20 years ago, and while the situation for women in Hollywood has certainly improved, there are still plenty of problems. So I think Kirsten Dunst is going for that Best Actress. I think she's Best Actress, not supporting. I gotta tell you, we'll see who else is in it. But not only do I think she could get that nomination, but I think she could get the win, and I think I could even feel good about it. Again, even though I hated the movie. So what do you think? Because I like Kirsten Dunst. All right, now wait a minute. Why is Kirsten Dunst getting lauded for her comments while Taraji P. Henson was instead just blamed for hurting the image of her film? Well, to some extent, it's because Dunst is not talking badly about the actual film that just came out, Civil War, which therefore infers that Civil War is a movie that did right by her. But still, having a white actress being allowed to complain while the actress of color seemingly is not, it does deserve a bit of a side eye. And again, somebody needs to ask, and I guess I'm doing it, what are we doing here? What's going on? Let's be fair. I thought Taraji P. Henson's comments, were very fair and they deserve to be heard. As for the two new releases this weekend, and speaking of actresses speaking their mind, I think the result for Abigail is not great. It's not horrible, but it's not what I think it needed to be. Now, it's not great for everyone involved with this film, but this movie's debut was particularly important for Melissa Barrera. Also, in the case of this topic, based on what we just discussed, I think it's important to note that Susan Sarandon also got a serious smackdown in this space as well. Now, despite excellent audience scores for a horror movie, usually these get a cinema score in the C range. I mean, these scores are fantastic. Abigail, box office-wise, is no Scream nor even Evil Dead Rise, which came out exactly 1 year ago, which is probably why Universal thought this was a good release date for a horror film. And there's been a lot of horror has come out this month. In fact, the two horror movies that came out this month just hit digital this weekend. I was going to bring it up a little later, but I do wonder if they potentially hurt Abigail in theaters. But also, Scream and Evil Dead Rise, to be fair, are parts of major franchises. And while Abigail is technically a Universal monster movie, it really wasn't advertised as such. Talk about a marketing faux pas. That's something for them to consider. They should have played that up more. The trades are saying, hey, Abigail opened on par with Monkey Man, but that debut seems to have cost Dev Patel a potential role in the new Jurassic movie. It's rumored that he was up for a role, yet we haven't heard anything. And after that, Jonathan Bailey was announced. I don't think anybody's actually signed on for the Jurassic movie yet, so it ain't over. But Monkey Man is tapping out at a little over 20 million domestic total. Whew! And I hope Abigail does better than that. And I think Abigail's debut doesn't make a strong case for bringing back Barrera for the next Scream. Especially when they already have Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox already lined up, and potentially Matthew Lillard, who's been rumored and now hinted with the last film to return, not to mention he's been lately hanging out with the Scream crowd again. Abigail didn't open much bigger than Radio Silence's pre-Scream movie, Ready or Not. Where's the bump for them? How are they back where they started? That's not great for them either. But this is just the first weekend. Abigail could be saved by a strong second weekend hold. Again, not a lot of competition next weekend, and the movie has great audience scores. Plus, it could end up doing very well on digital and streaming. It's a fun, really good movie. It's one of the best movies out right now, in fact. I think, of the latest releases in the last 2 weeks, this is the best movie. I liked Godzilla, and then I think this is the next good movie that's come out. And at least it can point to bringing in a very diverse, if small, audience. Also, while Barrera might not be able to get back into the Scream franchise, that doesn't mean she won't be able to keep working. Well, maybe not necessarily. Because $10.2 million ain't bad, especially for smaller films. So Barrera, it might be a situation where she just has to try and work her way up again. Like she has a setback, but she's still in the game. Although, of course, that depends on whether or not people in the industry are willing to work with her after her comments, which many people in the industry did find very offensive. She could also try going to a different film industry outside of Hollywood and also seeing if maybe she could self-finance. But bottom line, if you want to see Barrera keep working, you really need to see Abigail. And it's not too late to support her. As I said, let's see what that second weekend drop looks like. Or, as is so often the case with social media these days, does all that online championing not really have a real-world result? Just ask DC. Then, with Guy Ritchie's new movie, he also had a new movie come out exactly a year ago with fellow online superstar like Henry Cavill, Anthony Starr, although in a much smaller role in that film. And this new movie opened, just a scooch better. It's better. It's better. The audience, less diverse, but those who did show up for the film really enjoyed the movie as it has surprisingly strong audience scores. I think that's got to be Cavill's fans showing up and supporting him because, I didn't think the film was so good. And as you can see from the critics score, sometimes critics and audiences don't line up in how we feel about a film. Case in point, Super Mario Brothers, which I'm sure some of you are typing right now. But what's the fandom here? Super Mario fandom supported that movie. I think it's Henry Cavill fandom. I don't think it's Guy Ritchie fans. I think it's Henry Cavill's fandom. But as you can see, there aren't a ton of you because your movie only opened at number 4. So this is another movie that will likely do better on digital and streaming. And on that point, The Covenant, while it was a huge box office flop, let's hope Ministry does better than this, right? It was a huge hit on digital. Remember how long it was in the top 10 on iTunes? So there's also still hope for this movie. By the way, kudos to this is fascinating to me. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Kudos to Henry Cavill's PR team for actually getting the trades to write about a fake artificial intelligence James Bond trailer that features him in the title role. Remember how Ryan Reynolds, remember how Ryan Reynolds leaked Deadpool test footage to get that movie made? One has to wonder if AI trailers are the next clever, secretive way for actors to pitch themselves for roles and or projects. Who made that James Bond trailer? Even if Henry Cavill's team didn't make the trailer, they certainly recognized how, AI content gets a lot of views on YouTube, but this is the first time I've ever seen the trades pointed out. So at least Henry Cavill's team saw the views and were like, hey, let's tell the trades about it. But, if you are another actor's reps and you see the headline, you go, oh, hey, AI trailers, you say. We'll see what happens. It'll really be popular if he actually, I don't know. I think Henry Cavill's had a rough 2024 at the box office. It would be, even though I think he'd be great as James Bond from a business perspective, I would just feel maybe I'd be a bit too nervous about using him. And oh yeah, there was actually 3 new releases this weekend with Spy, X-Family Code White from Crunchyroll doing okay business. Okay. All right, as for the rest of the top 10, Godzilla x Kong is closing in on $500 million worldwide, but alas, no 1-2 punch for Dan Stevens, who was also on Abigail. So that kind of sucks for him. It makes it clear that everybody just wanted to see Godzilla and Kong. Nobody still cares about poor Dan Stevens. Well, Dune 2, even though it's on digital now, is tantalizingly close to $700 million. It might actually get there. And at least the new Ghostbusters finally crossed the century mark domestic. That's pretty slow and pretty small, but at least it got there, because a lot of movies these days don't. Over on streaming, I'm not going to include Variety's charts anymore on Movie Math because I think they just are too skewed by only covering original content. So back to Nielsen for mid-March, where we finally hit the debuts for Three Body Problem and Roadhouse, because of course Nielsen is so frickin' far behind. That's the weekend, by the way, as you might recall, when Variety launched their charts with those 2 shows. Nielsen has them both at the top as very solid. Now, huge hits usually have closer to 2,000 millions of views, or 1.9 or something. That's when you have a really big hit. So these being both at around 1.3 is solid, very, very solid, but still solid. This is also the weekend that Max dropped its bombshell docuseries, Quiet on Set, one of their biggest hits ever. And apparently, by the way, counted as acquired content by Nielsen. And this is also fascinating from a business perspective. You ready? All right. So not only does true crime docuseries, not only have those done extremely well for Netflix, but it's exactly the sort of content that has thrived on Zazzy's Discovery. He ran Discovery before he merged the two when he took over Warner Brothers, right? And he was saying that he wanted to take Warner Brothers more into that. You remember he was saying he hated dramas and that docuseries and that kind of content was the direction to go in? And we all laughed at him. Well, look who's laughing now. I mean, it worked. You got to give Zazzy credit where credit is due. And also, I think, a very important documentary as well. Dick Wolf, though, again, not doing so great over with his move from traditional network television to Netflix, but at least he made the overall chart. Because yes, for all of Shogun's hype, this show just can't break onto the overall chart. It's on the originals chart still, number 5 with 5 episodes. Remember, this is a weekly release. Only Peacock and Paramount Plus, along with Hulu, were able to break Netflix's grip on the original show's top 10 list. Side note, I don't know if you noticed, but Disney Plus, we talked about it a week or so ago, but they've now moved their trending playlist considerably further down on the homepage. Like, you really got to scroll to find it. And yes, once again, 6 of the top 10 shows are Hulu shows instead of Disney Plus shows. Also, I got to say, having this show as the first title card when you log onto the Disney Plus homepage, I don't know if it's different if you have parental settings turned on, but it just highlights that the two streaming services are a complex pairing. With movies, at least Roadhouse can be considered a breakout streaming movie. The second of the month after Netflix's Damsel, which is still right behind it at number 2. But remember, this was for a couple of weeks ago. Because now we're moving over to Netflix's charts for just last week with movies, where there are also some solid hits with What Jennifer Did, which had its own AI scandal, by the way, and Woody Woodpecker. Scoop, which was just number 6 for its debut weekend, has jumped to number 3 for its first full week on Netflix's charts. Also, after 5 weeks and its sixth week, Damsel has fallen out of the top 10. I had an amazing run, though. With shows, Three Body Problem and The Gentleman are also solid hits for Netflix. Yet, because they're just solid, neither one has gotten a season 2 announcement just yet. Well, plenty of other shows have that came out around the same time, like Avatar and Fallout. And let's see how Baby Reindeer does in the chart next week, because this was just when it dropped for the weekend. It started small, but it's been really gaining momentum on social media. The word of mouth for Baby Reindeer is quite strong. I haven't watched it myself yet, though. Maybe I'll check it out. Then Ripley, though, that has just not connected. Clearly, Netflix is not a service for highbrow content. Now, Ripley was originally going to be made for Showtime, but I think perhaps only HBO could properly launch a show like this. But wow, are audiences really that put off by black and white cinematography? Why do you think Ripley didn't land? I also think there was absolutely no advertising for it or media chatter. I wanted to talk about it. I convinced them to let me send out one, very small tweet, right? But Netflix, even though they did send it out to critics and press way in advance, we were under strict embargo, not even to discuss it, much less review it, until it launched at 3 a.m. On that date. So that's a real shame. I wish they had let media champion it a little bit more. Although, again, I don't know if it would have been enough. People seem to have other issues, like the feeling that Andrew Scott is too old for the role, and then again, that black and white cinematography. Also, period pieces can be a tough sell as well. Then, sure enough, Dune Part 2 and the 2-movie bundle are dominating iTunes. You want to know why the bundle's doing so well? Because it's a $30 price tag to buy just Dune Part 2, but for only $5 more, you can own both movies. Very clever pricing strategy from Warner Brothers. And there's Sydney Sweeney and David Dastmalchian with their new horror movies having just dropped on digital. And again, one has to wonder if that potentially undercut Abigail in theaters. And then Guy Ritchie, very busy. The Gentleman, the show, as we've discussed, is doing solid on Netflix. And the original movie's on sale for $5. And it spurred a lot of people to add the movie to their collection. And that's just popped in to the top 10. And maybe that undercut Ministry as well, potentially. As for this coming weekend, Challengers and Boy Kills World are the last 2 movies to open in theaters before the summer movie season officially kicks off. And as I said, for Zendaya's sake, I hope that Challengers opens bigger than expected. Do you think it will? I'm nervous now. It's such a good film. All right, and again, I wonder, Civil War and Challengers might be able to hold over until awards season, but could they both do it because they're out so early? Maybe, 2024 is a weird year. Maybe it'll be another dud for awards contenders, and so these two will have, better chances. Although I think Challengers deserves to have strong chances. And again, I'm supporting Kirsten Dunst. All right, so anyway. On digital, the second half of DC's latest animated movie drops Tuesday. What a shame what's happened to DC animation. It used to be so strong, and now it's, I think, just as weak as every other category over there. Although I think their comics right now are better than the Marvel comics that are coming out. But comics overall are also in a sad state. And then here, this is interesting. On Thursday, Love Lies Bleeding drops on digital, which is actually pretty aggressive against Challengers, as I think to some degree they'll go after the same audience. Can the Kristen Stewart, Katie O'Brien movie find more of an audience on digital than it did in theaters? We'll see. There are no new streaming movies this week, interestingly enough. But as for shows, The Big Door Prize returns with the second season on Apple TV this Wednesday, while on Thursday, the recast Dead Boy Detectives drops on Netflix, a new season of them on Prime Video, as well as somehow a second season of Velma on Max. But then on Friday, here's the big one, Knuckles drops its entire season on Paramount+. Can the Sonic franchise, after 2 successful movies, launch a successful streaming show as well? I think it could do it, maybe. And I love this pick of Idris Elba at the premiere. Both cool and adorable at the same time, like Knuckles himself. All right, so that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And how do you think Challengers versus Civil War will go down, not just next weekend, but how do you think they'll fare in the 2025 awards season? All right, share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.